They had lied and used forged documents to secure the interview with my mother, spinning lurid and false claims about the royal family that preyed on her fears and deepened her paranoia. Inside the grand corridors of Buckingham Palace, where tradition lingers in every gilded frame and duty hangs as heavy as the velvet curtains, something extraordinary unfolded. It wasn't a tabloid scandal. It wasn't leaked to the press. But behind those historic walls, a fierce feud erupted between two of the monarchy's most powerful figures, Queen Camilla and Prince William. What began as quiet tension eventually exploded into outright royal warfare. It didn't happen at a grand state event or in front of cameras. Years of carefully maintained diplomacy unraveled during what was supposed to be a routine private royal meeting, one that, according to palace insiders, was anything but routine. Voices were raised, lines were crossed, and decades of simmering resentment finally erupted. King Charles tried to intervene, but by then it was too late. In the aftermath, the House of Lords took an unprecedented step, involving itself in a matter normally kept far from public view. After urgent hearings and confidential testimonies from palace staff, the verdict was decisive. Camilla would be stripped of ceremonial privileges and permanently barred from attending critical royal functions. For the woman who had clawed her way from public disgrace to the title of Queen Consort, it was a stunning and very public fall. How did it come to this? How did Camilla, once shielded by Charles and bolstered by decades of institutional loyalty, end up confronting the future king and losing everything she had fought to secure? And what does this mean for the monarchy's future? This was not merely a personal dispute. It was a generational reckoning, a clash of legacy and power, and the final declaration that the crown's future would no longer be shaped by compromise, but by the firm resolve of a son who had never forgotten his mother, and who had finally reached his breaking point. Witnesses to the now infamous private gathering say the animosity between William and Camilla had been quietly festering for years. On that day, one ill-timed comment finally set everything ablaze. At Sandringham, in a seemingly ordinary meeting to discuss upcoming ceremonies, the king sat silently, tired and detached, as his wife and eldest son exchanged their usual cold formalities. But something was different. There was an edge to William's tone, a chill in Camilla's smile. Palace aides claim the spark came when Camilla casually suggested modernizing the monarchy's public image, hinting that Diana's legacy should gradually be minimized in future narratives. That was the breaking point. William, long patient with Camilla's attempts to reshape royal history, cut her off mid-sentence. His voice remained steady, but his words carried unmistakable weight. You don't get to erase the past because it makes you uncomfortable. My mother's memory is not yours to control. Camilla, visibly unsettled, shot back that William was overstepping and lacking respect. Then came the remark that shattered what little civility remained. Your mother was a complication. I am the queen. William stood, face flushed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His anger was controlled but searing. You may have the title, but you'll never have the crown the way she did. I won't let you tarnish what remains of it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Charles, usually the peacemaker, sat frozen, his loyalty to his wife and his son now in direct conflict. Camilla left shortly after, escorted by her attendant. But she could not have predicted what would follow. Her downfall, swift and absolute, and the moment that would mark the beginning of a new royal era. A senior royal advisor submitted a formal report to the Privy Council detailing the exchange and accusing Camilla of a serious breach of royal protocol. Within 2 days, word of the confrontation reached members of the House of Lords, and what had been private was on the verge of becoming painfully public. This clash didn't happen out of nowhere. The hostility that fueled it had been simmering for years. William had never forgotten how his mother, Princess Diana, was treated, or who played a part in her suffering. Despite the palace's carefully constructed image of unity, he had never truly accepted Camilla. Behind the scenes, he viewed her as shrewd, calculating, and determined to quietly exert influence over royal affairs. Their interactions were never affectionate or trusting, merely tolerated for the sake of appearances. But now, as William stepped fully into the role of future king, he was no longer willing to bite his tongue. He would not allow the same institution that broke his mother's peace to continue unchecked, not while his own children were watching. This was no longer just about the past. It was about who would shape the monarchy's future, and who no longer had a place in it. The confrontation happened in the drawing room of Clarence House, a space that was normally serene and private. On that day, it became a battleground. There were no cameras, no audience, only paneled mahogany walls, heavy velvet drapes, and an atmosphere so tense it seemed to hum. But before we continue, we'd love for you to hit the subscribe button if you're enjoying this video. If you just did, we truly appreciate it. Now, let's get back to the main content. At the center of it all stood Prince William and Queen Camilla, two powerful figures who had spent years avoiding direct conflict, finally forced to face one another. The meeting had begun as an ordinary discussion with a handful of senior royals and aides about upcoming engagements. Outwardly, it was calm, but the tension beneath the surface had already reached a breaking point. Camilla had recently drawn criticism for hosting private dinners with political figures, moves many saw as attempts to expand her influence. William had grown increasingly frustrated with her role in palace decisions, especially those affecting his children. The real spark that day, however, was Princess Charlotte. According to palace sources, Camilla made a remark questioning Charlotte's suitability for the public role she had been gradually preparing for. "Perhaps she's not entirely suited for the spotlight," Camilla said, her tone wrapped in feigned concern. "It can be such a heavy burden." William immediately understood the implication and refused to let it slide. Leaning forward, he asked evenly, "Are you suggesting my daughter isn't worthy of the future my mother was denied?" Camilla offered a dismissive smile. "Of course not. I'm only saying not everyone thrives under pressure." Even Diana struggled. That was the final spark. Witnesses say William rose from his seat, his voice firm but edged with anger. "Don't you dare use her name to justify your place here," he said. "You weren't chosen by the people. You were barely tolerated." Camilla's expression turned cold. She stood to meet his gaze. "Do you think I wanted this life?" she shot back. "Do you think I didn't pay the price for it? I've done everything for this family, including cleaning up after your brother's mistakes." William stood his ground. "This isn't about Harry," he said firmly. "It's about your constant efforts to steer this family away from its values and rewrite its legacy. My children will inherit this crown, not your name, not your ambitions. And if you ever try to poison them with your influence again, there won't just be words." For a moment, it seemed as though Charles might step in, but he didn't. He sat frozen, lips pressed tightly together, eyes flicking helplessly between his wife and son. Aides tried to intervene and bring the meeting to an end, hoping to diffuse the tension. It was too late. Camilla left abruptly, her heels echoing sharply in the marble hallway as she muttered for someone to remind William who the Queen was. But William wasn't finished. After she had gone, he turned to his father and, according to witnesses, said something that stunned everyone present. "You can call her Queen. I never will. And I will not let my children grow up thinking she earned any of this. I've kept quiet for years. But that ends now." Within hours, word of the confrontation spread through the upper ranks of the royal household. It wasn't mere gossip anymore. There were formal accounts, statements, even partial transcripts. The protective wall that had shielded Camilla since her marriage to Charles began to collapse. The final line had been crossed. What had long been a quiet power struggle had erupted into open conflict. And behind those palace doors, the monarchy's future shifted, not by decree or tradition, but by a son determined to defend his mother's memory against the woman trying to erase it. This could have stayed buried, just another royal scandal sealed away from public view, if not for the reaction of the House of Lords. The monarchy might run on tradition, but Britain's political establishment has limits. Camilla had crossed one. Soon after the altercation, murmurs began circulating in Westminster. The story wasn't coming just from palace staff anymore. It was being repeated by members of the nobility, backbench peers, and even moderate loyalists. This wasn't being framed as a misunderstanding. It was about Camilla overstepping her authority. The whispers grew into pressure. Letters were drafted. Discreet meetings were held in the Lords' red-carpeted chambers. Within a week, an official inquiry was launched, something not seen since Princess Margaret's controversies decades ago. This time, however, it targeted the Queen Consort herself. The accusation wasn't criminal, but constitutional. Several prominent lords argued that Camilla's actions had become dangerously destabilizing at a time when the monarchy could ill afford division. She was accused of abusing her influence, meddling in the optics of royal succession, and, most damningly, disrespecting the bloodline of the future sovereign. Lord Trefk, a staunch traditionalist rarely heard in public, was overheard remarking, "She isn't queen by right or by history, only by tolerance. And she's just burned that tolerance to ash." What followed was unprecedented. A secret emergency session was convened, an extraordinarily rare step. Palace representatives were invited to provide input, but declined to attend. Behind closed doors, a resolution was drafted. By the end of the week, the committee had passed an extraordinary motion that would change the royal household forever. The wording of the resolution was polite, yet unmistakable. The House would no longer acknowledge Camilla as a suitable representative of the Crown in matters of state or public ceremonial duties. It was not a formal removal, only the sovereign has that authority, but it amounted to a public political exile. Camilla was effectively barred from attending events involving peers, hereditary lords, or members of the State Council. Although the royal household tried to contain the fallout, the decision leaked within hours, sparking a nationwide media frenzy. Attempts were made to frame it as a mere procedural clarification, but few believed that. It quickly became clear this was tied to Camilla's mounting conflicts, not just with William, but also with Princess Anne, and even figures in the armed forces who had grown critical of her behavior at trooping the color rehearsals. Even more telling was the palace's silence. No statements, no attempts at damage control, no loyal media campaign to rehabilitate her image. It seemed the royal machine had finally decided Camilla was no longer worth defending. Royal commentator Hugo Vickers, usually measured in tone, admitted, "This is unlike anything we've seen before, a public rebuke delivered with surgical precision. It isn't treason, it isn't exile, but it's a message, and that message is clear. Enough." The effects were immediate. Camilla's scheduled appearances were abruptly cancelled, her absence noted at a London charity gala, a state banquet with foreign dignitaries, and even her own foundation's annual fundraiser. Behind closed doors, she was said to be furious, feeling betrayed not only by the lords but by Charles himself, who had done nothing to intervene. One aide reportedly overheard her shouting, "They've humiliated me," and he just stood by. But this time, no one stepped forward to defend her. For decades, the monarchy had quietly accommodated her presence. Now, for the first time, the establishment had pushed back. In the aftermath of the Lords' unprecedented decision, public attention shifted not to King Charles, but to his son. Observers noted William's composure. There was no anguish, no hesitation. He released no statement in Camilla's defense, offered no apology, and made no calls for reconciliation. While the press speculated he was staying quiet to avoid escalating matters, insiders described a different reality. William himself had been the spark. A senior courtier later confirmed that William's patience with Camilla had long since run out, well before her heated dispute with Princess Anne. Years of insults, quiet power plays, and veiled slights against his wife and children had built up like dry kindling. The clash with Anne, in which Camilla allegedly disparaged both Anne and the Queen's legacy, was simply the breaking point. So when the Lords acted, William didn't resist. He didn't try to stop it. Sources say he quietly welcomed the decision. Privately, William had never hidden his unease about Camilla's growing public influence, nor his dissatisfaction with Charles's insistence on elevating her to queen consort instead of the originally promised title of princess consort. That change, while symbolic, carried significant weight, and William had always been keenly aware that despite years of PR campaigns, Camilla had never truly won over the public. Now, with the Lords taking a stand, William finally had institutional support behind him. Rather than challenge the move, he let his silence speak volumes. In the days that followed, William carried on with his duties, calm, steady, and seemingly unbothered. At a veterans event, Charles shook hands and smiled but avoided questions about the family rift. Later, at a Royal Foundation function, a reporter called out a question about Camilla's absence. William simply walked on, saying nothing. William walked on without looking back. It wasn't defiance. It was authority. For the first time, the heir to the throne acted not as a son or an observer, but as a king in waiting. Those inside the palace took notice. Sources close to Kensington Palace said William projected steady, unshakable control throughout the crisis. To a trusted advisor, he reportedly said, "I won't be pressured into protecting someone who disrespects my family. If that makes me cold, so be it. My duty is to the crown, not to anyone's ego." Those words, if true, reflect William's style as a leader, disciplined, unyielding, and deeply attuned to the bigger picture. He understands that for the monarchy to survive, it must modernize, shed old scandals, and restore public confidence. Achieving that might mean sacrifice, even if it costs him his stepmother. One of the most telling moments came after the Lord's decision. William refused every request for a private audience with Camilla. Her camp reportedly tried to arrange meetings and calls, but he declined all of them. "He doesn't want another appeal," said one insider. This was his answer. While Charles wrestled with heartbreak and Camilla retreated in humiliation, William stayed resolute, unmoved, and unwilling to bend. His silence sent the loudest message. The boundary had been drawn, and this time it was his, not his father's. For Charles, the past weeks have been devastating. The man who spent decades fighting for acceptance of the woman he loved is now trapped between that wife and the son who will one day inherit his crown. Palace insiders say Charles has looked visibly drained since the Lord's decision to exclude Camilla from state and ceremonial roles. A king who prided himself on diplomacy and holding the family together has been dealt a blow he never expected. In a private attempt to make peace, Charles reportedly phoned William to find common ground, but William, calm and unwavering, refused to back down. "This is bigger than us, Father," he is said to have told him. "If we keep protecting her, the crown itself will lose credibility." The words hit Charles hard. He knows how sharply his son understands public opinion, and that William's popularity far exceeds his own. Yet siding with William would mean abandoning the woman who stood by him through decades of scandal and isolation. Friends say Charles has been unusually withdrawn, canceling engagements under vague excuses. Behind the scenes, the truth is painful. He is torn between his role as father and his loyalty as husband, a dilemma that painfully mirrors the conflicts of the 1990s, when his devotion to Camilla collided with his marriage to Diana. Camilla, meanwhile, is said to be furious at Charles's failure to defend her. According to palace whispers, their arguments have grown heated, with Camilla accusing him of letting history repeat itself by bowing to public sentiment again. "You let them destroy me once," she reportedly told him, "and now you're letting your own son do it too." For Charles, the anguish runs deeper than marital strife. He knows this is no longer just a family dispute. It is a struggle for power that will shape his legacy. The Lord's ruling has set a dangerous precedent, quietly confirming William's growing dominance over royal affairs. To many observers, Charles no longer appears to be the one steering the monarchy. Instead, he seems like a man trying to hold together a family fractured by history. And deep down, he knows the truth he cannot speak aloud. When the nation is forced to choose between his son and his wife, its loyalty has already shifted. Beyond the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace and the quiet chambers of Westminster, the people's verdict was swift and unmistakable. Camilla had never been their queen. The House of Lords may have delivered the official blow, but public opinion had already turned against her long before. Within hours of her suspension from state and ceremonial duties following the confrontation with Prince William, social media erupted. Hashtags such as #NotMyQueen, #LongLivePrincess, Anne, and #WilliamForTheThrone dominated trending lists across the UK and abroad. The response wasn't just loud, it was seismic. Polls taken in the days after the scandal confirmed what many inside the palace had long feared. 68% of Britons believed Camilla should never have been named queen consort. 79% supported the Lords' decision to strip her of formal duties, and an overwhelming 82% sided with William and Princess Anne. This wasn't a murmur, it was a roar. "I put up with Camilla because I felt I had to," a woman from Manchester told ITV News. "But after seeing how she treated Anne and the way she spoke to William, she's not royalty to me. She never was." For years, the palace had worked carefully to rehabilitate Camilla's public image, painting her as a devoted partner, a hard-working royal, and a loyal supporter of the king. But the narrative never fully stuck. Diana's shadow loomed large, and for millions, Camilla remained the woman who had broken the fairy tale. The altercation with Anne didn't just reopen old wounds, it deepened them. The optics were brutal, a queen consort lashing out at the Princess Royal, one of the monarchy's most respected figures, while simultaneously challenging the heir apparent in what insiders described as an unhinged tirade. It was the final fracture in an already fragile public image. Unexpectedly, younger Britons, previously indifferent to royal affairs, began rallying around William and Anne. TikTok and Instagram flooded with clips defending William's stance and praising Anne's composure. Even those born after Diana's death were now embracing the values they associated with William, Kate, and Anne: honor, duty, and authenticity, rather than Camilla. This was no longer just a family dispute. It had become a reckoning. Camilla's fall wasn't merely symbolic. It reflected the people's will in its rawest form. Across pubs, radio shows, and online forums, the sentiment was the same. She might have worn the crown, but she had never truly held the kingdom's heart. In a monarchy built on image, duty, and legacy, trust is its most valuable currency. For Camilla, once tolerated and now rejected, that trust had completely evaporated. The clash with William became more than a private embarrassment. It marked a turning point in modern royal history. What began as quiet unease inside the palace erupted into a full crisis, involving not just the king and the lords, but the nation itself. When the dust settled, Camilla stood isolated. Her title remained, but her authority was gone. For King Charles, the blow was deeply personal. He had spent decades trying to elevate Camilla's status, fighting for her acceptance, and even altering royal traditions to secure her place beside him. But not even he could shield her from the consequences of a crown that ultimately answers to the nation, not private devotion. The lifetime exclusion was far more than a symbolic gesture. It was a rejection of her legitimacy, a clear signal that Camilla's conduct had strayed too far from the standards expected of a queen. William made no attempt to soften the impact. His silence was deliberate, measured, and entirely in step with the gravity of the moment. This will be remembered not only as a scandal, but as a moment of correction. A reminder that, despite its grandeur, the monarchy still depends on moral authority. Service, stability, and restraint still matter. Camilla may continue to reside in royal palaces, and her name may still appear in official records. But in the eyes of both the public and the establishment, she is no longer the crown's trusted partner. Instead, she stands as a warning, a story of pride overtaking humility, ambition eclipsing duty, and a queen who forgot the ultimate truth of monarchy. The crown is never truly yours. It is only borrowed, and it must be earned every single day.